So I shot myself in the foot.
Ow!
Metaphorically speaking, of course, on a job. I recently directed my first TVC in a while. The budget was decent for my sort of work, but to the client, agency and production company, it was a fraction of what they've previously spent doing the same sort of thing. It was a somewhat glossy, pristine, clean-looking beauty spot for a shampoo brand. The key thing here was that it had to sit in the same visual world as two previous ads they had created, both with much larger budgets, and one of which with literal CGI level perfection. Let me start by telling you how the job came about. It was another job based on existing relationships with a production company I've worked with a ton before, but with a producer that I haven't worked with before. They wanted me to make a tiny budget in a relatively small white-walled gym look good for a silent ad to play on the walls of gym screens for several weeks here across the UK. With the help of Gaffer Charlie, who I chose over a camera assistant with the limited budget I had to work with, and two runners, we created something that I'm honestly not particularly proud of, but that came out way better than they were hoping/paying for on account of the amount of the kit that both myself and Charlie were able to supply as part of our package deals. Either which way, it was good enough that the agency were really happy. And I was told that they loved my banter with talent and thought that I'd be a perfect fit to direct and shoot a job they had coming up with British on-screen presenter and personality Claudia Winkleman, a frequent face of this mysterious shampoo brand here in the UK. I originally got the email about it from producer Ross whilst in the midst of another shoot, telling me a bit of info about what was required, coupled with something along the lines of, we've got a tiny budget, a bit better than the gym shoot, which I knew to be circa 10k, but nowhere near as much as the previous budget they had for the last one of these. How little do you think we can do it for if we shoot on your camera? I'm submitting budgets on Monday morning. It was Friday afternoon when I was digesting this email, so I had a brief call with them at lunch outlining the most minimal of crew to achieve a similar look to their previous ads, and confirmed I'd be happy to shoot on my kit for a bargain buyout of 3k. That would be for me directing and DPing it on the shoot day, a couple of meetings, a treatment, and my kit. This, in the metaphorical sense of course, is where I shot myself in the foot.
Ow!
He wasn't sure they were going to go for it, and I wanted the job. I should have said, what sort of budget are you looking to submit? And at least insisted on that blessed director's 10%. Plus a little bump for my kit I'd be bringing on, which held the rental value of at least £1,000 on its own. But I didn't. It became apparent to me just how much larger the budget was after sign-off and the crew numbers began to rise.
I just wanted to add that on a few videos where I've talked about how I've perhaps undersold myself, how much stick I've got about how I shouldn't give these large companies work for nothing. I just want to be clear about two things. First of all, I'm getting paid really good money compared to your average 9-to-5 job, which I'm more than happy to get paid for doing work that I love. Second of all, any lower rates than your average that I might be getting paid for these sorts of things is totally on me and my lack of representation or my lack of standing up for myself. It's not on the producer and it's definitely not on the clients. They're not trying to screw me over. They just want the job done for the budget they've got to work with.
I had no less than 3 meetings ahead of the shoot. I put together one very basic treatment as requested. I spoke with art department and lighting on several occasions in the run-up, as well as with Nick the Grip, my infamous first AC James Wicks, and producer Ross on plenty of occasions. From my initial bare-bones recommendations, the crew quickly expanded as our timings and needs became apparent. There was the producer, a production assistant, myself, a first AD, first AC, grip, auto cue operator, sound op, a dip, playback, gaffer, one spark, art director, assistant art director, prop master, costume designer, hairstylist, makeup artist, and an on-set medic, as well as lots of agency and the clients. And of course, our talent, Claudia. It was decided that we'd shoot a continuous day due to her availability. So we did have breakfast and lunch catered for, but stopped for just 5 minutes to wolf down the lunch, and then core crew carried on shooting whilst most people carried on nibbling. Although this meant an early start, it also meant a shorter day and an early wrap. Our first AD took time to put together the schedule the week before and confirmed I was happy with everything before signing things off. She was truly a godsend on this job as there was so much different dialogue that I was bound to miss something. We had a few different deliverables, and although I had my many lists mounted on my iPad next to the camera, there were script changes as late as mid-morning, which with everything else going on around me, some of which just didn't quite make it over to my notes. So if she wasn't there, we would have probably definitely missed some dialogue. For me, the shoot day started a little after 5 a.m. Breakfast was scheduled for 6:30, and even though I'm not much of a breakfast guy, I think it's important as director to be one of the first on set to answer any questions should they crop up. Plus, it's tough to pass on a free meal. Because of the early start and continuous day, call times were staggered by necessity. I was well prepared and had been on top of the other departments to make sure that they were too. So the day didn't really have any reasons not to run perfectly, but art department let me down. They turned up 20 minutes late, then went to breakfast when it was scheduled for an hour earlier. I like to think I'm quite understanding and polite on set for the most part, but this pissed me off. I politely called up the department head and asked them to head back to set as every other department was waiting on them to be able to carry on setting up. Then, when they had set up the backdrop that had come as 3 separate flats, it turned out it was warped and bumpy for some reason. Both myself and the producer had been more than clear on multiple communications it had to be pristine and glossy, and a block colour painted background shouldn't have been the thing to let us down. Dimensions and plans from the previous shoots had even been provided. I spoke to lighting and we tried adjusting things to see if we could hide the bumps but still achieve the look that we needed to, but it just wasn't working. Without trying to overpressure them, but feeling incredible pressure myself for this relatively simple shoot about to go tits up in front of the agency and client, I asked for a solution ASAP. More pressure applied by the producer led to them running across the way to purchase and paint a whole new canvas backdrop, as incredibly fortunately we were in a studio setting that had what was needed just on the doorstep. The talent had arrived. I went and introduced myself, reassured and set expectations for the day before running back to set and trying to capture what I could with the product, working around a not yet entirely complete set. We started discussing finding additional post-budget to deal with the issues after the fact, but it was going to require a lot of masking and tracking, and things were going to get more costly than they could afford. A little late, we started rolling on the first shot with talent, as we had to just because we were now running behind. Resigned now to the fact that we weren't going to move the camera anymore and have her stay in a particular spot that shouldn't require too much masking. But then halfway through the take, without warning, R walked in, pulling out the backdrop and replacing it with a still wet replacement backdrop. Praise be. There were a few shots where it was still a bit streaky from needing another coat or two, but for the most part, I think we got away with it.
Head & Shoulders called me and they said, Claude, we've got a new product. Goodbye thinning hair. Hello, Derma X Pro.
After that, the day went very quickly and I think pretty smoothly. Something that I hadn't considered was the studio was going to be bloody cold on the shoot day, despite having heating. It was fine for the crew, agency and client, but the talent couldn't wear a coat on camera. So I asked our runner to go and source additional heaters that we could have on in between takes. Also, despite shooting on a soundstage, which meant that it should have been soundproof from the outside world, it wasn't, and we were underneath a flight path, so there was the occasional hold up there. It was great having a DIT, first AC and monitor man on set for a change. If the budget could have stretched a little bit more, a second AC would have been helpful for boarding all the different scripts on camera for the poor editors, but other than that, I don't think we really fell short in any other areas. At the end of the day, the agency and clients all seemed pleased, and we even wrapped 20 minutes early, which was dreamy. So not an 11 plus 1 hour working day, not even a 10 plus 1 hour working day, but a half plus 9.
From a cinematography perspective, we were lighting for beauty, an area that I don't often play in. But as a loose rule from my observations over the years, it tends to mean less shape overall. And by this I mean a lot less contrast on the face of the subjects than I might typically aim for in other work. We also had the look of the previous ads to try and stick to. The main things from these being that they really wanted us to replicate these light beams down the back wall, which is one of the main reasons art department's original bumpy wall was so obvious and impossible to hide. There was an odd stipulation in the rental agreement with this location that we had to hire in our lighting through them. I'm not a producer, but I don't think this is unheard of. However, on the scale of jobs I'm often doing with Gaffer Charlie, it was a little bit absurd, as we had 90% of what we needed already on our 2 vans. But it's their money, so that was fine with us. I used it as an opportunity to hire in a breezy 180 HMI as our key light, because I'd used it once before on a beauty job shooting for another director, having learnt about it myself from behind the scenes photos taken on the set of other DPs, and big and soft was what we needed. We then built everything off of that. There had been some failed experimentation with some mirrors, or CRLS reflectors, to create the slashes, but we lost too much output, / didn't have quite enough power to contend with the strength of the breezy once we had pulled the light round enough to fully wrap the subject's face. So the final setup looked like this: a breezy 180 2.5K HMI as our key, 2 Arri S60 sky panels off of a 12x12 ultra mounts for the fill light. We'd originally only had one S60 up, but the client wanted more fill. One light mat plus 3 as the hair light boomed over from the side. Then what ended up being an aperture 1200D with an FM Fresnel, barn doors and a floppy or two to help shape it. Lastly, an aperture 600D with a spotlight attachment. From memory, I also asked either Gaffer Charlie or Spark Alice to handhold a piece of bounce in nice and close camera right on some of the product shots to fill some more shadows. They really don't like any shadows in beauty. I think we were probably walking a dangerous line creating this much on the face of our subject as is.
This is one of those jobs where my hands were pretty much off it once the van was packed at the end of the shoot day. I got a look at the first round of edits and sent back some comments, pernickety things like crops, subtle digital zooms and notes for the colorist, but other than that, my part was done. Watch this video next to watch the process behind my first £100,000 ad. And I don't want to come across as needy, but please subscribe for more semi-helpful tips and interesting insider industry knowledge.